Hi, I'm Paulina. I really like to read, and these are the 11 books that I have read so far this year. So you might be thinking, 11 books? That's very little compared to some of the booktubers on this platform who are reading maybe 11 books a month. Well, to that I say, I think 11 books so far this year is a lot of books. Secondly, everyone reads at their own pace. Thirdly, I was a full-time student, so this is all I had the emotional bandwidth for. Disclaimer, I had an incredible year so far. I have an average rating of 4.5 this year alone, which is unlike me. I'm not an easy rater, so I've just been really lucky with the books I've been picking out. And then one more thing, in my ratings, I'm going to give synopsises, but they're going to be as much spoiler-free as I can. I will be talking about anything that's mentioned in the blurb or maybe in the first 50 to 100 pages. Nothing that's a crazy spoiler that will ruin the enjoyment of reading the book. So we started off this year incredibly strong. I read The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson, arguably the king of fantasy, the father of the Cosmere universe. Going into this book, I wasn't sure if I was going to commit to the Cosmere universe. It's essentially a Marvel-like universe that Brandon Sanderson has created, spanning between 17 to 24 books. To be honest, I couldn't really figure out how many books exactly it was. People seem to have varying opinions on Reddit about is it 17, 24? I've even seen like 34, so there's a range of a lot of books. I had initially bought this book many years ago when I was in my era of buying every single book that TikTok recommended me, and it has sat on my shelf for maybe 4 to 5 years at this point. The Way of Kings is the first book in the Stormlight archive. There's a lot of discourse over which book should be read first, and arguably I read it wrong by reading this book first, but since I already had this book on my shelf for 4 to 5 years, I have decided I'm not going to buy a new book. I'm just going to go straight into this. And oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, was this a crazy 5-star read for me. To explain what this is about, it's an insane epic fantasy with a plot so intricate that I cannot do it justice just sitting here and explaining to you what this is. Mind you, this is a 1,000-page book. To give a brief understanding of what it's about, it essentially spans 4 POVs. It's about Kaladin, who's a former soldier and now a slave. It's about an assassin who does not want to do his job but is forced to, a noble woman who is planning a heist by becoming a scholar to save her family, and then Dalinar, who is a high prince who is getting visions from a forgotten past. Mind you, these are just the POVs. It does not encompass the absolute brilliance of the story. And with 1,000 pages, I have never felt like Brandon Sanderson was dragging his feet in the plot. I always felt like the plot was moving. There was something fresh. There was something going on. And by the end of this book, you form this unhealthy parasocial relationship with the characters, and everything comes together. And I wept when reading the ending of this book, not because of the sadness, but just because how brilliant this story was, how incredible the plotline was, and how satisfying everything came together. It just felt like I was witnessing a true form of art. It got the best of my emotions. I have never consumed anything as incredible as this, and to be so honest, I've been chasing this high ever since, and I am committing now to read the entire Cosmere universe because Brandon Sanderson, you cheeky little guy, this book is insane. His writing is insane, and I get the hype, and I recommend, if you're a fantasy reader, that you buy into the hype as well and you start reading the Cosmere series. My personal opinion on the reading order, as someone who's just read a few books of this universe, I don't think it matters as much as the internet makes it out to be. Like, whatever, if you already bought this book, just read this book. Like, it's fine. Like, I had a really good time reading that. But if you want to start with the other recommended book that I'm going to talk about later in this video, like, that's also going to be fine. It's a really good read as well. Second book of the year that I read. So beginning of this year, I've created this goal to read 1 nonfiction a month, and I was pretty good at it at the beginning of the year, and then life got busy and I kind of dropped off. I read some that I didn't like, and then I ended up DNFing, and it was just like a mess. The first book that I chose to read was The Courage to be Disliked. Disclaimer, I did audiobook this. I'm one of the people that believes that audiobooking books is still a valid form of reading. You are entitled to your own opinion. The cool thing about this nonfiction book, it was presented as a conversation between a philosopher and a student. So you're kind of there with the student, learning at the same time as they are. This book explores the teaching of Alfred Adler. It teaches readers how to find happiness and freedom by letting go of trauma and any societal expectations. So after reading this book, I gave it a solid 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. I felt like there was some very interesting, jaw-dropping, controversial things that were mentioned. So I definitely felt like I had increased my horizon of knowledge. But to be so honest, now I can tell you very little of what I read. Did I think it was a book worthwhile reading? Yes, but I can't really tell you what I learned, except one thing. This book essentially says that every single problem in your life is an interpersonal problem. What does that mean? Well, Adler's idea suggests that many of our problems are rooted in how we relate to others and our desire to want to belong to somewhere and to feel significant. Which, honestly, yeah, reading that book, I was like, this rings to be true. But I'm also no psychology expert. I've read very little about psychology, so I don't think I am the right person to tell you if this is right or wrong. I just enjoyed the book, and I felt like there was some pretty good wisdom in there that a lot of people would find beneficial. Third book I read this year was Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. This is argued to be the book you should start the Cosmere universe with. So it's the first book of the Mistborn series. I do believe it actually has another name, but on this cover it's just says Mistborn, so that's what I'm going with. Hands down, one of the coolest magical systems I've ever read about, and this book was an easy 5 stars for me. This is also Brandon Sanderson's very first bestseller. It's kind of what put him on the map, so really cool to read. Mistborn and The Way of Kings pretty close to each other because you kind of can see how his writing has advanced in this book, but also this book already, writing is so good, really enjoyable. And so the plot of this book, we're in a world where ash rains from the sky, the sun is red, everything is gray, nothing green grows. The concept of something green out in the wild is wild to the people of this book. This is how far their planet has been ruined. And this world is ruled by this dark empire, this terrible person who has segregated the world into the upper class and the slaves. While the story centers around this very young orphan thief, the protagonist of every fantasy book, of course, this orphaned thief has magical powers that only the elites are supposed to have, or some of them. She ended up having it as well. And so the magical power is called allomancy, and it is all about pushing and pulling on metals. I've never read a magical system like that, but essentially there's a ton of different stuff they can do by drinking this vial of liquid that contains metals, and then they can burn this metal inside of them to move themselves closer to something and away from something. And as a engineer, like, that was really cool to read, honestly, because people never talk about metals in that way, and it just felt like such a, honestly, a boy thing to write about for starters. Honestly, it was done incredibly well, and it was so fun to read about and try to figure out how this all worked. And so then the main character, Vin, joins a rebellion, and she's tasked with infiltrating the elite, and that was so fun to read about. So a very good basis for a fantasy novel, and this is done so incredibly well. I'm really looking forward to continuing this series. Then my nonfiction book for February was Nice Girls Don't Get the Corner Office. So this guide identifies 100 problems that women have in the workplace that is preventing them from getting maybe that position they want or progressing in the corporate ladder. And it essentially talks about how as girls we're taught all of these rules about politeness and the right way to act, and how the girlhood that is taught to you is essentially preventing you from moving up in the corporate ladder. This book provides a ton of step-by-step guides on how to navigate difficult conversations, how to avoid conflict, and how to place yourself on the map at your corporate job. This book as well I thought was incredibly useful, especially anyone who is planning to go work in the corporate world. I felt like it pointed out some things I would have never personally thought about, and a lot of mistakes that I think are really easy to make as women in the workplace. And she kind of draws a finger to it, and she's like, hey, actually don't do that. It's gonna really make you set apart from your male colleagues who are not doing that. I gave this book like a 4 stars. Next book I read this year was the long-awaited 3rd book of the Empyrean series, Onyx Storm. Onyx Storm was going to be my tiebreaker on whether I was going to continue the Empyrean series or not. I, like many people, fell in love with Fourth Wing. Loved that book so much, but Iron Flame just didn't do it for me. I give this book about a 4 stars after reading it. My main critique was that there were so many characters that at the end of the book, when there's the inevitable plot twists and names are being thrown out, I had no idea who they were. So I felt like I couldn't appreciate the plot twists for what they were because I genuinely didn't know what they were. I had to go on TikTok later and watch a ton of videos of people recapping and their own experiences to even catch some of the things that were dropped in this book that I didn't catch the first time around. I will be continuing the Empyrean series. I love Violet and her storyline. Honestly, it was a solid 3rd book. Like, middle books of the series typically just are a bunch of information that we need for the grand finale, and we still have 2 books or 1 book to the 5th I had a good time. If you want a more deeper analysis, see my experience reading the book, there's this video that I put out where I read this book. After reading so many fantasies, I needed a little bit of a break, and I honestly don't remember the last time I had picked up a romance, and so I picked up Love Theoretically by Ali Hazelwood. Ali Hazelwood is a love author for me. I love a lot of the books she puts out. They're just so fun to read. They're cringy at times, but you go in with the expectation of having a good time. And honestly, I think that's a really good lesson to go into any romance with. Go in with the expectation of having a good time, and girl, you'll have a great time. Don't put an expectation on a romance book. I especially appreciate Ali Hazelwood because I do come from a STEM background, so I have a good time reading about STEM characters. And this romance book is about a theoretical physicist and a experimental physicist. So Elsie, who's the main character, she's an adjunct professor that obviously doesn't pay a lot. She's frustrated. She has to run between campuses. She has to grade all these dumb papers and have to deal with college students, and so on the side she also pays her bills by being a fake girlfriend. What a great trope. She then learns that one of her clients' brother, Jack Smith, was the person responsible for ruining her mentor's career and a lot of careers of theoretical physicists. And this guy, Jack Smith, is an experimental physicist. And so then the story kind of goes over how were the careers ruined? What did Jack Smith that was so controversial? Why did Jack Smith do what he did? It's your typical enjoyable millennial romance from Ali Hazelwood. It was a good time. I was kicking my feet. I was squealing. I ate this up in like 48 hours. It was so enjoyable. This was a 5-star for me. I really enjoyed it. Okay, this next book I read changed my life. And you're gonna think, Paulina, you're being a little dramatic, but I'm being serious. It changed my life. Finally read Beach Read by Emily Henry. This is, honestly, the fact that I haven't read Beach Read at this point is criminal. And if you have no idea what this is about, where you been, shoddy? Welcome back to 2025. If you don't know what Beach Read is, I assuming this is the very first booktube video you've ever watched, and for that I say hi, welcome. I appreciate you being here. Stick around, enjoy this book, enjoy this review. Beach Read, arguably the book that put Emily Henry on the map. I have never read. I have read all of her other books of her relatively new releases, and I really enjoyed them, but she started losing me in some of her newer stuff. I did learn Beach Read was one of her more famous books, specifically because it feels like she put a part of herself into that story. This was a phenomenal 5 stars, maybe even a 6-star read for me. This book hands down was amazing. This is the first book that I've ever actually created categories for tagging, and now I've been categorizing, tagging all of my books. I was writing in it. I felt like I was dissecting the way she wrote this book. It was so beautiful. It was so lyrical. Emily Henry wrote grief in such an incredible way. This book was so heartfelt. The romance was phenomenal, and I was reading some interviews about her writing this book later on, and so I had learned Emily Henry had actually written this book after she lost her beloved childhood dog and had used that grief to fuel this story. You can really tell that this story came from something within her. On the off chance that you don't know what Beach Read is about 2 authors who are at beach houses who are both kind of in a writing slump and decides to swap genres and essentially make a bet who can sell their swapped genre book first. And both of them take each other on these experiences to experience each other's genre. The romance writer is trying to do something more literary fiction. The literary fiction writer is trying to do something more romance. So they go on really fun dates, like carnival dates, but then they also go on like some cult interviews to learn about the cult in the area. Near the end of the book, I was sobbing reading some of this stuff, snot dripping down my nose, I'm a mess, makeup running. It was just such an enjoyable experience. And after reading Beach Read, I understand why people are incredible diehard fans that they are. And if you're not an incredible diehard fan of Emily Henry yet and you haven't read Beach Read yet, that is why you aren't an incredible diehard fan. So if you want to get there, read this book, girl. Read this book. It was amazing. I would find myself staring into the abyss thinking about how phenomenal this book was. I put so many assignments on hold to just finish this book. It was that good. Then I read another romance book, and I read Between Us by Bahari McFarren. So Bahari McFarren is an artist that has silently climbed up the ladders, slithered through the booktube videos, and slowly is someone who we are all talking about now. Between Us reads like a reality TV show. go. This is such a fun time. If you just want a fun time and a fun time, that's it, this book is perfect for you. It's filled with drama. It's essentially a friend group. There's relationships, interpersonal relationships between people. And so Roisin, who is the main character of this book, finds out that her producer boyfriend put in a really personal secret she had told him into a new show that he produced. So obviously they break up and then craziness ensues. First thing I need to say, Bahari Macfarlane depicted a toxic relationship excellently. She depicted narcissism so well. She was able to really point a finger of how relationships look like after they go through a breakup, or the intricate details of a failing relationship. She did that incredibly well. But this book obviously has another romance, and that just felt a little rushed. The story felt really incomplete in just 300 pages. I almost wish there was more story building. Felt really surface level, which is why this book received a 3 stars from me. It was really fun. 3 stars is a really good rating, and I still recommend you give this book a read. Don't expect to be profoundly moved by the words in this book. Then I've decided to go back a few centuries and read Little Woman. Little Woman as a classic is not something I grew up with. I quite frankly went into this completely blind. I didn't ever watch the movies. I didn't really know what it's about, aside that it was a very beloved classic here in the West. And I gave this a 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. I really like books about life, about interpersonal relationships. That is just the theme of this video, isn't it? Interpersonal relationships. This is a story of 4 sisters and how they go throughout life. It talks about all the mundane things that can happen, the uncomfortable parts of life. It talks about grief. Overall, I really enjoyed it. This version of Little Woman is the combination of the first book and the second book, which makes this more complete because the first book does leave off at kind of a weird spot in my opinion. So this is Little Woman and Good Wives. I do think it makes sense to keep them together. I'm really looking forward to watching the movie and comparing and contrasting the book to the movie and seeing how they differ from each other. And I honestly feel like a wiser person after reading this book. I think it puts such a strong emphasis on family. I thought it was really inspirational how they always stuck up for each other no matter what. They had their quarrels, as little siblings do. They went through life. They weren't perfect. This feels very special, and I understand why people like this book as much as they do. One thing I will note when reading Little Woman, I felt like this wasn't a book I could sit down and read for hours, or I would get like restless inside. I read a large majority of this on an airplane and on a train, so I had time to kill, and I was sitting there and religiously reading this, and that I kind of struggled with. Something about classics is there isn't that punch that the nowadays books have because of our short attention span, and maybe this is the reason why we should be reading classics, to kind of fix that. But I did feel at the beginning I definitely struggled sitting down and reading this for hours, and then near the end of my train commute I was sitting there diligently reading. So maybe more of a maybe more of an observation on our generation more than on this book. Then I took a break from reading classics, and Emily Henry, looky released her new book, Great Big Beautiful Life, and I also read this book on the train, funnily enough, and oh my Lanta, was this book absolutely phenomenal. The last few Emily Henry releases I wasn't a huge fan of, so I did go into this book a little more weary, but boy oh boy oh boy did I fully eat this book up and like it so much. This was a very solid 5-star for me. Firstly, I've seen a lot of commentary about how this wasn't really a romance book, and they were annoyed how similar it was to Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and I personally feel like I have a lot to say on this topic as someone who has read The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I think we have this notion of what a romance book should look like. Romance books are different. Not every romance book is the same, and it's not a black and white genre. Secondly, this definitely had a plot of romance woven throughout the entire book, so I'm not entirely sure what people mean when they're saying there isn't really a romance. There definitely is. So I think when going into romance books, we should give up the preconceived notion of what romance should look like and just let the author take us on an adventure. Is this book similar to Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo? The only way that they're similar is that the main character is listening to interviews of a very famous person she's going to write a memoir of, a person that went into hiding who is now older. that is it. Taylor Jenkins Reid left a quote review on this book. So she read it, and I'm sure she's fine with it if she left a review. Aside from that fact that there's an interview of an older famous person, nothing is similar. Did you read Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo? Do you know what Evelyn Hugo is about? Because this is not similar at all. Essentially, they're invited by a very famous person of an elite family, Margaret. She's invited to her home and essentially interviews to do a memoir for this woman. She finds out that she wasn't the only person called to do this memoir, and this other guy, Hayden, was called to do it as well. Hayden is a big shot already at this point. He has written a very famous memoir. So when Alice walks in, she's like, I don't feel like I have a chance next to this guy. Through a month trial period where Margaret is trying to figure out which of these authors she's going to choose to write her memoir. And you get to learn all about the secrets of this family, and it's insane. They then realize that Margaret's only giving pieces of her story, and they're covered by NDA, so it's not like they can really talk about it and share their opinions and theories. This book, to be quite frank, just felt like a repackaged version of Beach Read. It was incredibly similar. Both authors that are kind of gunning for something. There's a really huge aspect to grief, but I thought it was done incredibly well, and it was still just different enough from Beach Read to not feel like a copy. And I felt this book was so metaphorically beautiful. It was so lyrical. Emily Henry has a beautiful way with words. Great Big Beautiful Life has risen to my second favorite Emily Henry book. I liked it so much. If you really enjoyed Beach Read, I think you'll really enjoy The Great Big Beautiful Life. I felt like there was so much substance to it. There was so much more than just a romance. There was so much story to this book. Then I read one more classic to complete my classics video. I read John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men, and to be frank, I picked this up because it was skinny and because it was on a every book Rory Gilmore has read post. I was taken aback by how much I enjoyed this book. John Steinbeck's work is incredibly controversial because of the language he uses and his general dark themes. This book, trigger warning, continues something called mercy killing. What this book is about is two friends during the Great Depression who are ranchers on a farm, and they kind of go around, they work on different farms. In some way, George is kind of the caretaker of Lenny. Lenny, who's this really big guy, has a learning disability. This book talks about the way disability was seen during the era of the Great Depression. And at the end of the day, this book is a commentary on that. And I sobbed. I cried. It was incredibly depressing. I felt like in 90 to 100 pages, John Steinbeck accomplished a lot, and also his writing is so incredibly beautiful. The prose was amazing and kind of makes you understand why this book did become a classic. I definitely recommend it if you are someone who enjoys reading classics, but be careful, this is quite a depressing read as it covers some pretty emotional and hard topics, and do understand this is a product of its time. Be aware of that going into this book, but it definitely was a book that packed a punch and will be a classic I will be thinking about for a really long time. I'm not really sure where to put this book because I kind of want to give it a 5 stars, so maybe I should, but I think I'm going to just give it a 4 for now, and that rating might change later on. The latest book I read blew everything out of the water for me. I honestly don't know how I'm going to talk about it because there is no amount of words I could use to give this book justice, and that is Liquid: A Love Story by Maryam Rahmani. So this was my book of the month pick for March. So this book follows a Muslim scholar who recently finished a PhD and thinks herself to be smarter than everyone. Her and her best friend Adam would often turn up their noses to rich people. They would until our main character, who we actually never know the name of, decides she's had enough and she's gonna marry rich. She decides to create a spreadsheet and go on 100 dates, and by the time fall comes around, she wants to be engaged, you know, living in some rich mansion. Maryam Rahmani might have my favorite prose to ever have existed. The way she wrote this book had me flabbergasted, throwing the book. It was so beautiful. I have so many sentences highlighted, tabbed. They were so good. So I have seen a lot of criticism on the firstly I've seen no one talk about it. Secondly, the reviews that I have read have been fairly negative. I think it's, again, because they're going in with a preconceived notion on what a romance is supposed to look like. Go into this book just wanting to enjoy it. I will admit, the first maybe 10% of the book I really struggled with. The main character, I can't tell if was intentionally unlikable, but in the beginning she was incredibly unlikable to me. She was very cynical, it was hard to read, she had a problem with everything. And then she grows on you and does, in my opinion, go through some insane personal development and starts to reconstruct her personal beliefs on society and some of her own PhD work. She herself, being half Iranian, traveled to Tehran. This book made me realize how lacking my own personal education was on Iran. Iran is not something that we're taught about in our curriculum at all, and is now something I am going to be taking the time to learn about because I was amazed at how interesting reading about Iranian life was. The thing about this book, it is noted to be highbrow, and I definitely got that. There was a lot of things that I had to tab and take some time to research, so mind that we're going into this book is a little bit more of a project than just a fun little silly read. You're definitely going into this with the expectation to learn something, and I definitely have. Not only did I learn about the perspective on a person who is so different from myself, I learned about how to be a better ally, how to be a better person. Loved this story so much. I thought the romance was good. If there was a romance, that's one of the commentaries, that there wasn't enough of a romance, but this is a story about a person struggling with their personal identity, being an immigrant who doesn't feel at home in the country they live in, but also doesn't feel at home in the country that their roots are from. That's a really common struggle that immigrants and children of immigrants feel, and I felt like she depicted that so incredibly well in this book. Without a doubt, this book was an insane 5 stars for me. I loved it so much, and this is Miriam's debut novel. This is an insane debut novel to put out. This reads like Miriam's like 500th book. I just felt like it was so incredible. This book is not for everyone. This is for people who really enjoy lyrical writing and who enjoy more depth to the story. This is not a sit on the beach read. This is you're sitting and you're annotating, you're reading and rereading paragraphs, you're Googling, you're getting someone to explain certain aspects of history to you that you weren't taught in your school. This, you have to put in work, but in my opinion, the payoff is so good. And after the halfway point, you're so hooked in the book and you're just reading as fast as you can, trying to learn what happens next. It really grew on me and I loved it so incredibly much, and I want people to read this more. Last book I read was The Let Them Theory by Mel Robbins. This was an easy 5 stars as well for me. Mel Robbins just embarks some really great knowledge on letting them and then let me. I thought this is like one of the best self-help books I've ever read. I felt like Mel Robbins embarks so much of her personal wisdom into it and makes it very personal. I think the audiobook was especially excellent because it almost felt like she was just there, like sitting with you, having a conversation with you. And the audiobook was unlike any I've read. Like, she herself got really vulnerable in it and you could hear the emotion in her voice, and I felt that was very powerful. And The Let Them Theory just approaches so many different ways you can apply it in your life. Apply it in your relationships, how to apply it with children if that's what you have, with your parents. How do you apply it when you move somewhere, you have a big life change? In some ways it's something that's talked about quite frequently in self-help books, but in the other ways this did feel fresh and new. So those are all the books I read so far this year. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and I'll see you guys next time. Bye. What's the word?